This is not my first trip to England technically, but it's the first time I've come to England with the explicit purpose of looking at ancient megalithic sites. And I'm finding them absolutely fascinating, and I'm finding a lot of similarities between these sites and other megalithic sites I've been looking at around the world. For instance, the barrows that we're seeing in England, they look very similar to things I've seen even on Easter Island, a half a world away. And I wonder, why are there these similarities? Some people might say it's coincidental, you build with stone, there's only so many ways to build with stone, but I think it's more than that. In some cases they seem like they're being built very similar, with very similar techniques on a similar scale, with small openings. And I have to really wonder, could there be a functional reason? Could there be reasons that they're building this way because this works? Maybe, protect themselves. Something I'm very interested in is solar outbursts. It would provide protection from solar outbursts. But could there also be knowledge passed around? We have something like Stonehenge or the other stone circles that we've been looking at. And what do we have in Turkey at Göbekli Tepe? We have stone circles. Again, very similar on one level. On a different level, the ones in Turkey are very long, narrow, thin, tall. So there's a different style there. But they're still stone circles. There are also similarities. The ones in Turkey are carved with reliefs on them of animals and symbols. Stonehenge, or a lot of these, seem to be either very, in comparison, relatively crudely worked stones, or not worked at all, where they were just picking natural stones that suited their purposes and erecting them. So in a way, those are almost stylistic differences from one part of the world to another, but overall I see this commonality, this similarity, which is absolutely amazing. One of the things that has come out of my studies for me personally is that classical archaeologists, classical historians, and prehistorians have incredibly underestimated the abilities of ancient people when it came to navigation. I think that there's lots of good evidence that ancient peoples could pinpoint where they were on the earth. They could navigate from one spot to the other on the earth and on the ocean, so both terrestrially and seafaring, if we want to call it that. They were navigating around the globe, around both on land and across oceans. And this ties in with astronomy. They had a very good sense of astronomy. They could use the skies to navigate to very precise ways that we no longer have, or we have forgotten. We do have anthropological and ethnographic analogies to this with, for instance, Polynesian navigators that to this day, with what seem like very simple little maps, we'll call them, made out of sticks tied together, they can navigate across vast expanses of oceans with no land in sight for days and days and days. I think this is a very ancient tradition, but it requires a very complex knowledge base, very sophisticated knowledge base, and I believe they had that. And they were working with the stars, they were working with the sun, they were working with the moon. This ties in with the evidence that they were traveling across the globe, and we have physical evidence for that, of connections, similarities, even things like foodstuffs that seem to have been passed from one continent to another in very ancient times, long before Columbus. We have the megaliths that would indicate they were looking at the skies, having very precise information. This is exactly what you need for navigation. So one of the things that comes out of it for me is that yes, they were incredible navigators. When we look at these ancient megalithic sites, we find in many cases, I'm convinced that there are some kind of astronomical relationships, astronomical significance, and I think that there's two things going on here. One, the ancient peoples passed down knowledge from generation to generation. I think they passed down very precise knowledge over periods of, I would say, thousands of years. And maybe they used some kind of recording devices, but I also think that they had a tradition of just passing down by memory, by oral ability. So I think probably different ways that they passed it down. I think in some cases knowledge was actually encoded into the megalithic sites, and what they could pass down is simply the key, if you would, the tool of how to read that information, which unfortunately we've now lost and some of us are trying to rediscover. So there was probably information encoded into the megalithic sites. The key was passed down as to how to read that. That's one hypothesis I have. And also these very long traditions of passing down information. We know even from Greco-Roman times that they still had these types of traditions. Something else about the megalithic sites is that they weren't just passing down knowledge, but they were using these sites. They were using these megalithic markers to continue to add to their knowledge base in terms of, for instance, astronomical observations. So I think they were both passing down information, encoding information, and using various megalithic sites to develop and expand their knowledge base and information base. One thing I'm asked all the time is, you've got these incredible sites with these huge blocks. I mean, we are talking tens of tons in some cases at some of the sites, over 100 tons when you start looking around the world at megalithic sites. And these blocks, in some cases, for instance, where I've done a lot of work in Egypt, they are maneuvered, incredible finesse when they maneuvered them, no space between them, they're interlocking together. People talk about, oh, there must have been hundreds and hundreds of people moving them around with ropes and whatnot. Well, there's no room for hundreds of people in some cases. And I will tell you, I'll be honest, I don't have the answer to it. I'm a geologist. I know how difficult it is to work this stone. I know how heavy it is from experience. It just boggles the mind, and I believe that this is really one of the outstanding mysteries of how they moved them, how they maneuvered them, how they got them into place in very precise positions. And I honestly don't know. I've heard all the theories, everything from using levers to ropes to rollers to sledges with oil underneath. I mean, some of them strike me as frankly a little bit crazy, ridiculous, and obviously it was done. They are here. And maybe they had a different time frame than we do, in the sense that they spent lots of time and energy over generations. That's been suggested, but that still doesn't really solve the problem of how they did it. So to me, this is one of the great mysteries that remains. Honestly, it's not something I've spent a lot of time researching it. My research interests have been more with dating and usage once they've been built, but it's not an issue to be ignored. But I just sort of smile when someone thinks they have a simple, pat answer, especially the professional archaeologists who then cannot demonstrate in real life that it would have worked.